This is probably the peak of Donald Trump's political power. You can love his agenda or you can hate his agenda, but right now he is holding all the cards. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here. And I thought it was a perfect opportunity this Friday, with the inauguration of Donald Trump just happening this week, to revisit my trip to Mar-a-Lago and talk about power. As we sit here, President Trump is kicking off his first 100 days. This might be the peak of political power that, and I hope it is actually, because there's limits to how much power we should want anyone to have in this country. But this is probably the peak of Donald Trump's political power, of his power in his lifetime. He has been reelected with a popular majority and gets to start fresh with his agenda. And so I think it's useful to think about and talk about what power is and the impact it has on all of us. And I want to start off by revisiting this trip and this moment where I got to meet the president. I was invited to moderate a roundtable conversation at an event hosted by James Fishback and his new investment firm, Azuria. And in the middle of the event, the president makes an appearance. We recorded the whole thing, and so let's just watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 45th and 47th President of the United States.
It's a nice group, very smart-looking group, very nice.
We're having a conversation about you're going to open up the golden era for the United States.
This will be the golden era. We're going to do a good job, and you'll be very happy. It's really been terrific. Great support. A beautiful mandate to do it right.
Absolutely.
So anyway, have a good time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Mr. President, I have a gift for you. It is the 45th and 47th Bible verses.
Oh, that's very nice, huh?
So,
That's very good.
it's my wife's idea. Can
Look
I
at
read?
the first one. Look at the first one, Mr. President.
Yeah, read this first one. It is something.
Oh, that's true.
Who does that remind you of, Mr. President?
I don't want to get into that. That's, thank you very much. That's beautiful. I'll read that. Thank you, everybody. Have a good time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Kathy. Nice to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Have fun.
So, how did this happen? What was it like? Let's start there. James has worked closely with the administration, and so he was hosting this event at Mar-a-Lago. He said, you should come, and I did. And it was weird. It was weird. For starters, we had to go through all crazy levels of Secret Service as we entered the space. I was expecting Mar-a-Lago to be gaudy. There's this great SNL skit where Donald Trump plays a janitor in Trump Tower.
This place looks like the Liberace Museum.
Hey, I'm the prince of this city. When you're in my office, you treat me with respect.
Who did your decorating? Saddam Hussein?
I was expecting it to be sort of gaudy and over the top. The space was actually really beautiful, kind of old world, kind of Victorian. That's neither here nor there. The thing that was crazy was that here we are in this pretty small area. We're having this conversation. The president comes in. We walk out of the room, and it's like, there is President Trump and Vice President-elect Vance sitting down for lunch, clearly talking about the transition and all the craziness and what's going on. The election had only been a month prior. My wife Lisa ended up talking to Stephen Miller because we did this immigration rap battle, and a version of him is actually featured in it. It was like, oh, we should try to interview Stephen Miller about immigration, see where we disagree in a lot of places, but where do we agree? Whatnot. But that's weird. There he is. Kristi Noem is walking by. It was basically the future executive branch of the United States in the room surrounding. And so you are confronted with something which is true and strange. And that is that these enormously powerful people, truly powerful, I mean, this is the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world, but he's still just a person. They're all just fellow human beings, right? They have the same 24 hours that we all have. They have the same foibles, the same quirks and problems. And the thing about this moment was this wasn't a media junket. It wasn't like there were other people with cameras there. We were there with our crew. We were the only crew. Everyone else there was part of the administration or perhaps trying to join the administration, seeing if they might have an opportunity to be an ambassador of this or an undersecretary of that. It really was like being on the inside for several hours. I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't quite realize that was what we were walking into. There's a quote by Lord Acton, which I really like, and that is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that that's true. I think one of the beauties of our founding and of America is that our founders were actually deeply worried about this. They really thought about power. They had just escaped the King of England and didn't want a new king. The reason why we even call the president Mr. President instead of something more royal is because the founders, and especially George Washington, wanted to lay the groundwork for a more common kind of leadership and not a new aristocracy. And so we say Mr. President, very businesslike. You just wear a suit. You're not wearing anything that fancy. Suit and tie is good enough for Mr. President. But it's still really weird. You see me giggling. I do that a lot. Maybe it's a coping mechanism. In fact, in that case, it kind of was, because I was sort of totally in awe of the entire thing taking place before my eyes. There's something about meeting people in person that has this influence. And I think that's the thing about the concept of power in general. There is a simple way of thinking about power, which is how much control do I have over you? In a kind of libertarian sense, you would say, well, the government is real power because it can coerce you. If you don't do what the government says, they are the guys with the guns and they'll go put you in prison. That's a typical kind of libertarian way to think about power. But the more subtle way is to think about the fact that power is across a spectrum. And that, sure, I don't need to have the ability to throw you in jail to have power and to have power over you to some extent. If I am very persuasive, if I am magnetic, if I have something you want and I can sort of manipulate you because you want it real bad, I have a certain amount of power. And some people, and I think Donald Trump is one of these people, they sort of exude that. They have a kind of magnetism, right? They're magnetic personalities. I one time met Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, and I was struck by this. It was very early in my career after moving down here, and I worked on a little video and got to spend some time with Governor Perry. And he was a super magnetic personality, in some ways almost more magnetic than President Trump, really exuded that. Because I started off working in entertainment, I did end up getting to meet celebrities along the way. Pardon me if this looks like bragging, but these are little moments. It's like a trip down memory lane. Michael J. Fox, Quentin Tarantino, Richard Dreyfuss, William Shatner. Before he was as crazy cool as he is now, crazy cool / hated, I guess it depends on where you're coming from. Lisa and I met Elon Musk at an event that was as close to an Illuminati event as I've been to, actually. And through all of these sorts of interactions, encounters, I gotta say, it mostly has been curious and interesting, but not that interesting, to be perfectly honest. I've never really gotten particularly starstruck. There is one time, really, that I really got starstruck. And I've talked about this a little bit in the past and gotten burned on it in the comments because my fellow conservative viewers don't particularly like Steve Jobs. But I happen to be a super fan of Steve Jobs. And so when I was working at Nickelodeon, I befriended one of the sales reps and she invited us on an executive meeting, which was really kind of ridiculous because I was by no means an executive at that point. I was basically a motion graphics artist, all bright-eyed and thinner and less hairy than I am now. But I was a geek, and she said, no, this will be great. You can come on out. And so this was the original Cupertino campus at Apple. And there was this moment that I will never forget. So we're walking into this vestibule at One Infinite Loop. and we're with a group of engineers that worked on QuickTime actually and Final Cut. And we're just talking about the future of motion or something. And I look over there and these elevator doors open and out walks Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. And I am like losing my mind. I'm losing my mind. So I look and I can't believe what I'm seeing. And I wave like this. And all the engineers are like, no, what are you doing? Don't make eye contact with Steve. This is a bad choice. Steve looks, he squints at me as if to say, do I know this guy? And then immediately looks away like, I don't know who this fucking guy is, and keeps on walking. That was the most starstruck I've ever gotten. And it's probably the closest comparison to this experience of meeting Trump in this moment at Mar-a-Lago. And the thing about Steve Jobs is he was renowned for having what people called the reality distortion field. He could activate this reality distortion field both on a mass scale in his keynote presentations, but especially apparently in person. And so I've read all the biographies of Steve, and the original Macintosh engineering crew that built the first Mac, they were working like animals, pulling all-nighters, putting this thing together that seemed physically impossible from the start. And Steve was known for this, for both good and ill, asking impossible things of people and convincing them to do it. That was his power, his persuasiveness, the force of his personality, his ability to influence others and to convince them to do the thing that he wanted them to do. And very often, though not always, in Steve Jobs' case, people ended up happier for it. It's an interesting quality of leadership. I think we hear about this from great coaches, that they're able to pull something out of you that you didn't know you had. And that is a kind of power. I think that's a kind of power that comes with effective leaders. And that comes in all shapes and sizes. But it is power. The power to persuade is a kind of power. I think it is a healthier power than political power. But even political power has its limits and fundamentally still involves being able to be persuasive. I think we're seeing the limits of that in places like California with Gavin Newsom. But I think right now, Donald Trump is at his peak political power and his peak persuasive power because he has cultural winds at his back. One of the things that's so difficult about just being a normal person and meeting people like this, and how do you think about that, and how does it change you, is that when you're in the presence of these kinds of people, you can't really tell if your perceptions are being distorted by everything you think you know about the situation. Are they exuding this magnanimous force, or is that something you're conjuring in your mind because you know that they're rich and powerful, or because you think you have to act a certain way? It's like, it's the president, so I'm going to clap. I voted for him, so I'm perfectly happy to clap for him. But that is weird. It's strange to attenuate the way you behave for others based on kind of what they can do for you or for other people, and not for you. Like, what Donald Trump gonna do for me? Nothing. I don't know. And yet you feel you have to act a certain way. And I think that's really strange. These are still fundamentally just other human beings, right? He has the same 24-hour day as the rest of us. He has the same limitations of how many things he can know, how many things he can process, not the least of which being, he's getting older. One of the things that I think we aren't taught, and that I'm not even sure where you look to get this lesson from, other than philosophy perhaps, is that there are limits to what anyone can do. We live in an age of imagination along a lot of fronts. And I think we believe that people can do almost magical levels of things if they have enough power. And that's not true. When you're walking around that place and you're seeing that they're just people and you're thinking about it for real, you're like, well, I know how much I can get done in a day, and there's not that much. And it's actually hard, it's hard to manage people, actually. It takes a lot of time. If you want to hold other people accountable, if they report to you, if they're your cabinet, they're your team, you're going to spend a lot of time engaged in follow-up, engaged in like talking to each person and what do they want to accomplish and where are they going to go next? And okay, let's check in a couple weeks. None of that can change. Like every person still fundamentally faces the same constraints in time and energy. And I think we end up expecting impossible things out of government, out of leadership. And yet we also have expectations that don't get met that are wholly reasonable. And trying to figure out how to navigate that is really hard in our public discourse because we just get wrapped up in the stories we tell about what's possible or what's impossible. I think that's going to be on display in a big way over the next 100 days for President Trump. He wants to get a lot done. And he can rightly feel like a lot of the country, most of the country, has his back up to a point. But what we all have his back for differs a lot. And everyone voted for him for different reasons. And he still has the same 24-hour day. So we're all going to be disappointed in different ways. And we have to figure out what level of disappointment is reasonable and unreasonable. And I think that that's something that comes with power. It's almost like power guarantees disappointment in a certain sense. We have this with medicine. My dad's a doctor. People expect doctors to perform literal miracles and get really mad at them when they don't. They're just human. They're going to make mistakes. Not all of those mistakes are criminal, but some of them are. So you need a way to know where the reasonable limit is. I don't think we have that in America. I don't think we have that in our discourse. I don't think we as Americans, I don't think we've actually been educated or trained or led to understand the limits of power and the limits of what's possible. And I think the people like entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and others who make use of like really bold visions, they create a bit of a head fake with that because it's both useful and important, but also creates whacked out expectations. And in the meantime, on a daily basis, I think life is a lot more messy and complicated. And we all sort of have a better sense on a day-to-day level of just how messy and complicated and hard everything is. And we suspend that understanding, that proper understanding of the world when we look to powerful people for both better and worse. And I think because absolute power can corrupt absolutely, I think our bias should always be more skepticism the more powerful someone is. The more powerful someone is, the more scope for their decisions to impact people's lives, whether public or private, the more they will face weird incentives, the more they will struggle to have trusted people in their circle. And the more that the people in their circle know that they're dealing with someone powerful, they will themselves be distorted. And I could feel it when I was there. I could feel it. It's hard to describe, but you could just feel yourself behaving in ways that are hyper aware of the fact that you're with this person. And that should give us all pause. Because if we want our powerful people to not be corrupt lunatics, they need to have honest feedback like the rest of us do. And I think that's where things go off the rails. I think that's where things get so hard. There is conspiracy. There are bad guys with bad ideologies plotting. I think that's absolutely true. But I think there's a certain banality of evil that we don't spend any time thinking about. And that is what's going on in these smaller interactions that get distorted by power and celebrity and that warp people slowly all around. And I think we've got to be on guard for that wherever we are in the spectrum. I think the best we can do to prepare ourselves and our kids for dealing with powerful people and with opportunities that apply pressure that have corrupting potential is to have a foundation of what's right and wrong for us. I think knowing with clarity what kind of person you are and what your values are and not deviating from them is really important. One of the things that's so interesting about the time we're in right now is that it used to be the case, cultural power, that large-scale persuasion was only available to a really tiny number of people. And now with stuff like this, any Joe jerk-off can reach a lot of people, myself included. And that creates all kinds of weird things. I think we all now have to figure out how to navigate a version of power and celebrity, because any one person can suddenly confront this. And the weird Lord Acton forces at work when you suddenly have something that a lot of people want and how they change around you. We saw it with the Haktua girl who went from being a nobody to going to prison for crypto scams, right? We see it with lottery winners who suddenly find every Tom, Dick, and Harry in their family coming out of the woodwork wanting to be close to them. This is the way power distorts. This is the way power and influence corrupts. And I don't think we get taught anything about this. We're thrust into it, or it catches us by surprise. I think we've got to figure out how to study this. I think this is what the great works maybe are supposed to do for us. And this is what the lessons in the Bible grapple with. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in that book and weird power struggles. And that's the whole thing, at least the Old Testament. And I think there was an old wisdom that we need to rediscover if we want to be able to have healthy relationships with power in this world. And I think it's more important now than ever that we actually do that and we take it seriously, especially as parents. The world's only getting smaller and harder to navigate for all of us. I hope you get the chance to experience some of this weirdness in your life, and I hope it's later in life where you kind of know who you are, because that helps a lot. So how do I wrap this up? Well, let me say this. We started this channel several years ago because I was worried about the future of our kids, and still am. And I think that we have to model what it means to be able to live in a free society. And I think one of those things is, how do we interact with power? And how do we act when we feel the incentives to behave shifting and pulling us towards behavior that's just against our values and not right? And I think that one of the things I will do my very best to do for you on this channel is continue to try to be a truth teller as best I can, to be a critic of the president, even as someone who broadly wants him to succeed and voted for him, and doesn't pull punches in that regard. And so I have to try to overcome this well-established thing, which is when you meet someone in person, like the president, it kind of warps you into liking them more. And so I'm going to try to mitigate that as best I can for all of our benefits, but especially for you who come here, I think, looking for a reasonable take on the world. I hope I can live up to that, and I know that you will let me know if I'm not. And as always, I look forward to hearing that feedback in the comments. I hop in there and check it out, and I really appreciate it. And I'll say one more thing. One of the ways I have tried to mitigate some of the forces at work is by running this channel actually as a nonprofit. We are funded by donations. And so if you like what we're doing and you want to keep us honest and want to be a force for good in the world of persuasion, I encourage you to head to dadssavesamerica.com, check out what we're doing a little deeper, and become a supporter, because that's how we avoid the undue influence of forces that might pull us in the wrong direction. So, have a great weekend.